Deep within the amber core of every story lies a truth that has been preserved for an absolute eternity. We dig through the layers of time to find the lessons that still matter today. Click subscribe now and discover the timeless beauty of a narrative told well.
The day my brother showed up at my penthouse with a moving truck, I was in the middle of a call with my largest client. I saw him through the security camera feed on my phone, standing at the lobby entrance in that same worn jacket he'd had for 5 years, a duffel bag over one shoulder, our mother right beside him. She was wearing her church clothes. That's always how I know it's serious. She wears her church clothes when she needs something. I told my client I'd call back in 10 minutes. Then I sat very still for a moment, looking at that tiny screen thinking, here we go, let me back up. I'm 31 years old. I run a boutique financial consulting firm out of Chicago. I have 11 clients, a team of 4, and an apartment on the 23rd floor of a building I have dreamed about since I drove past it at 19 years old with $200 in my bank account, and a bus pass that expired the following Tuesday. I am the first person in my family to graduate college, the first to own property, the first to build something from nothing entirely alone. That last part is important, entirely alone. When I was 24, I asked my parents for a loan of $3,000. I had just landed my first real contract. A small logistics company needed help restructuring their expense reporting, and I needed to cover 2 months of software licensing and 1 month of my own rent while the payment cleared. $3,000. I had a signed contract to show them. I had a repayment plan written out by hand on a piece of notebook paper, because I thought that would feel more personal, more trustworthy. My father looked at the paper for about 4 seconds. Then he looked at my brother, who was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a bowl of cereal at 2 in the afternoon, and he said, "Your sister thinks she's starting a business." My brother laughed. Not meanly, exactly. Just the way you laugh when something seems absurd. My mother said she didn't want to see me throw money away on a dream. I said it wasn't a dream. It was a contract. It was already real. I just needed a bridge. They said no. I went back to my apartment, put the software on a credit card at 22% interest, survived on rice and frozen vegetables for 6 weeks, and paid it off the month after the contract cleared. I didn't ask them for anything again. Over the next few years, my company grew slowly, then faster. I moved to a better apartment, then a better one. I hired my first employee, a recent grad named Tio who is still with me today, and is genuinely one of the sharpest people I have ever met. I got 3 referrals from that first logistics client, then 6 more. Then the referrals started coming in without me chasing them, which is when I knew something real was happening. My family knew, in the vague way families know things when they don't pay attention. My mother would occasionally ask if I was still doing the computer stuff. My father once told a neighbor I worked in banking, which is not accurate, but I didn't correct him. My brother, who had been in and out of jobs since high school, warehouse work, food delivery, a 6-month stint at a car rental place that ended badly, never asked anything about my work at all. What he did ask about over the years was money. Not from me directly, through our mother usually. A few hundred here and there when he was between jobs. Once, almost 2,000 when he wrecked his car and needed to pay a deductible. I sent what I could in the early years because I felt guilty about wanting distance. I told myself it was just family. This is what you do. Then came the penthouse. I want to be precise about this, because people assume penthouse means something flashy. It's not a party space. It's a 2-bedroom unit on the 23rd floor, with a good kitchen, a home office, and a view of the lake that I genuinely never get tired of. I bought it 14 months ago. I told my parents I had moved to a new place. I gave them the building address in case of emergency. I did not invite them over. I did not post photos of it online. I live quietly. I still don't know exactly how my brother found out the details. My best guess is that my mother mentioned the building name to a relative, and my brother, who has always been better at gathering information than doing anything with it, figured out the rest. What I do know is that on a Thursday morning in March, while I was on a call with a client who manages assets for 3 regional hospital systems, my brother and my mother showed up at my building with luggage. Not overnight bags, luggage. My brother had a rolling suitcase and 2 large plastic totes. My mother had a weekender bag and what appeared to be a casserole dish, wrapped in a towel. I finished my call. I took 3 slow breaths. Then I called down to the front desk and told them to let the visitors up. I want to explain that decision because it's the one people always question. Why let them in at all? Why not send them away at the lobby? Because I wanted to look my brother in the eye when I said what I had to say. Because I wanted there to be no ambiguity. No. The front desk must have misunderstood. No story he could tell later about being turned away without a chance to speak. I wanted him to hear me clearly, in my space, surrounded by evidence of what I had built without any of them. I also called my attorney, not to have him come over, just to give him a heads up that I might need a document, drafted quickly, depending on how the next hour went. He told me to text him if I needed anything. I said I would. My brother walked in first. He looked around the apartment the way people look around spaces that make them feel something they don't want to feel. His jaw went a little tight. He said, "Nice place." I said, "Thanks." My mother came in behind him and immediately went to the window. She said, "Oh, this is something." She said it the way she says things when she is recalculating. Like she had estimated the number and just learned she was significantly off. I did not offer them anything to drink. I sat down in the chair across from the couch and I waited. My brother sat. My mother sat. There was a pause that lasted maybe 15 seconds, which felt longer than that. "So, we're in some trouble." I said, "What kind of trouble?" He said, he owed money. He said it like it was a weather report. Matter of fact, unavoidable. Something that had simply happened to him, rather than something he had done. He had borrowed against a personal line of credit 2 years ago to invest in a business venture with a friend. The business had not worked out. The friend had disappeared. The debt was now $47,000, and the lender had begun collections proceedings. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "How long have you known about this?" He said, "A while." I said, "How long is a while?"
He said,
"About 8 months. 8 months. He had known for 8 months and had not mentioned it. Not to me. Clearly, but apparently not to our parents either until recently. Because my mother's expression when he said the number out loud was the expression of someone who has just heard it for the second or third time and is still not used to it. I said, "And what is it you're here for?" My mother leaned forward. She said, "We thought, since you're doing so well." I said, "Mom." She stopped. I looked at my brother. I said, "What specifically are you asking me for?" He said $47,000. He said it quietly. He was looking at his hands. I sat with that number for a moment. 40, not a small amount for most people. For me at this point in my business, a significant, but manageable number. He knew that. That was why he was here. I said, "And what's the plan for paying it back?" He said he would pay me back when he got back on his feet. I said, "What does that mean in terms of a timeline?" He said he wasn't sure yet. I said, "What's your current income?" He said he was between jobs right now, but he had some leads. I said, "What were you doing before?" He named a warehouse job. He'd been let go 2 months ago. I said, "So you have no income, $47,000 in collections, and no timeline for repayment." He said, "I'm your brother." I want to pause here, because I know that line. I have heard it in various forms my entire life. It's not really a sentence. It's more of a reframe. It means, the normal rules of transactions don't apply here. You owe me something just for existing in relation to me. I had spent years believing that. It took me a long time to understand that love and money are separate things, and confusing them helps no one. I said, "I know you're my brother." My mother said, "We're not asking you to just give it away. We're asking you to help family." I said, "I understand that." She said, "You have this apartment, this company. You're not hurting." I said, "No, I'm not hurting. You're right. I worked very hard for a very long time to get here, and I'm not hurting." I paused. I also did it without any help from anyone in this family. She started to say something. I kept going. I said, "When I was 24, I had a signed contract in hand and I asked for $3,000. Not a gift. A loan, with a repayment plan. You said no. My father was not there. He doesn't travel well since his hip surgery. But I knew he was part of this conversation in every way that mattered." My mother said that was a long time ago. I said it was, and I figured it out. I put it on a credit card, and I figured it out. And every year since then, when something got hard, I figured it out. I didn't call you. I didn't show up with luggage. I looked at the plastic totes by the door. "What is all of that, by the way?" My brother looked at the totes. He said, "We thought we could stay for a little while. While we sorted things out." I looked at him for a long moment. "You were going to stay here," he said, "just for a bit. A few weeks maybe. In my apartment, you have 2 bedrooms, you live alone." I took a breath. This is the part where I want to be honest about what I felt. Because it wasn't the hot spike of anger people might expect. It was something colder than that. Something almost like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally see a pattern that was always there but you kept trying to explain away. He had not come to apologize. He had not come to reconnect. He had come because he had run out of other options. And I was the only one he knew, with enough to absorb the damage. I was not a sister to him in that moment. I was a resource. I said, "I'm not going to give you $47,000. My mother said, "We're not asking you to give." I said, "And you're not going to stay here." The room went quiet. My brother said, "So you're just going to let me go under?" I said, "I'm not letting you do anything. You made choices for 8 months while this grew. I wasn't consulted." He said, "Because I knew you'd say no." I said, "Then why are you surprised that I'm saying no?" He didn't have an answer for that. My mother started to cry, soft, controlled, the kind of crying that is still a form of communication, still a tool. I recognized it. I had been responding to it since I was 7 years old. I sat very still and I let it happen and I did not reach for her hand. After a moment I said, "There is one thing I'm willing to do." They both looked up, said, "I can buy the debt." My brother said, "What?" I said, The collections account. I can purchase it from the lender. That's a legal process. I pay them a settled amount, usually a fraction of the face value, and the debt transfers to me as the new creditor. Your account stops going to collections. The pressure from the lender stops immediately. My brother looked uncertain. He said, "And then what?" I said, "And then you owe me instead. Under a formal repayment agreement, structured terms, monthly payments, interest at prime rate, which is lower than anything a collections agency would offer you. You'd have a real timeline, real numbers, real consequences if you default." He said, "You'd do that?" I said, "I'd consider it, if you're serious about actually resolving this rather than just making it someone else's problem for a few months." My mother had stopped crying. She was watching me now with an expression I couldn't quite read. My brother said, "How much would you pay to buy it?" I said, "Collections debt at this stage typically settles for between 30 and 50 cents on the dollar, depending on the lender. I'd negotiate." "You'd still owe me the full 47, on a payment plan," he said. "That seems like it benefits you," I said. "It benefits both of us. You get the collections activity off your back immediately. I get a legal contract with enforceable terms. That's more than you have right now." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly. I said, "I need you to understand something before you agree to this." He looked at me. I said, "This is a business arrangement. I am not your personal bailout fund. If you default on the payment plan, I will enforce the contract. That means wage garnishment. That means collections on my end. I will not feel bad about it, and I will not negotiate it away because we're related. Do you understand that?" He said yes. I said, "I need you to say you understand it clearly, not just yes." He says, "I understand. If I don't pay, you collect. It's a legal debt." I said, "Yes." My mother said, "This doesn't feel like family helping family." I looked at her. I said, "What does feel like family helping family to you?" She didn't answer. I said, "Because, when I was 24, family helping family might have looked like $3,000 and a handshake. You said no. So I figured out what I needed to figure out, and I built something. And now you're here because my brother is in trouble, and I'm willing to help him in a real, structural way that actually solves the problem instead of just moving it. That's what I have to offer. If that's not enough, I understand, but it's the only option on the table." There was a long silence. Then my brother said, "Okay." I said, "Okay, you'll do the repayment agreement?" He said, "Yeah." I texted my attorney. While we waited, my mother and I sat in a quiet that was not comfortable but was at least honest. At one point she said, "You've changed." I said, "I've gotten clearer." She said, "You used to be warmer." I said, "I used to be easier to take advantage of." "That's not the same as warm." She didn't say anything to that. My attorney sent over a draft repayment agreement within 40 minutes. We had used a similar template before for a client situation, and he adapted it quickly. I pulled it up on my laptop, walked my brother through every clause. He read it more carefully than I expected. He asked 2 questions, both reasonable. I answered them straight. He signed it. I told him I would contact the collections agency first thing the following morning, negotiate the purchase, and send him confirmation once the transfer was complete. He said, "Thank you." I said, "You're welcome. This is a real agreement. Treat it like one." My mother stood up. She picked up her weekender bag. My brother picked up his duffel. They left the plastic totes by the door. I think he was hoping I'd tell him to leave them. I didn't. I carried them to the elevator myself and handed them over. The casserole dish, my mother kept. I went back inside and stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking at the lake. It was one of those early spring days where the light hits the water at an angle that makes everything look like it's being filmed. I stood there long enough to feel my heart rate come down to something normal. I want to be clear about something. For anyone listening who's been in a version of this situation, I don't regret helping my brother. I genuinely hope he pays every installment and rebuilds something stable. What I did was real help. Not a handout that would have solved nothing and taught nothing, but a structure that gives him a chance to actually recover. What I don't regret even more is the boundary I held about everything else. They came to my home without warning, with luggage, expecting to stay, expecting me to absorb a $47,000 problem, because the alternative was uncomfortable. They had written me off for years as the child who thought she was starting a business, and now they were standing in the apartment that business paid for, asking me to empty my hands. I didn't empty my hands. I extended them, carefully, on terms I could stand behind. 3 weeks later, I received the first payment. Automatic transfer, exactly the amount specified in the agreement, on the exact date we had agreed upon. I'm not holding my breath, but I noted it. My mother called last week. She didn't mention the money or the visit. She asked about my work. She asked if I was eating enough. She said the weather in their town had been cold. I told her the weather in Chicago had been cold too. It was the most normal conversation we'd had in years. I don't know what that means yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe the beginning of something that looks like honesty, finally, now that there's nothing left to pretend about. What I do know is that I went back to my desk after we hung up, opened my laptop, pulled up a new client proposal, and kept working. That part hasn't changed. That part never will.